Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in the UK on Tuesday, seeking renewed support as Ukraine grapples with deadly drone attacks targeting civilians, power infrastructure and logistics hubs across multiple regions. Now, this comes as at least 7 people were killed and 24 wounded in the latest attacks by Russian forces. Joining us now to discuss the latest is Stefan Korshak, Senior Defense Correspondent from the Kyiv Post. Good to have you with us here on TVP World. Good morning.
Good morning, Sasha. Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to tap into your defense skills and expertise. Now, there are various reports here, just trying to nail it down, but still looking at these latest strikes, these latest attacks involving drones by the Russians. Give us your take on how this changes the calculus, what's the damage, and what this signals for the campaign.
Well, in simple terms, it's more of the same, and no significant changes are really being seen. There was some hope that with the oncoming of spring and the ability of the Ukrainians to provide a whole lot more power because they weren't using as much for heating, that the Russians would reduce the number of and scale of attacks against Ukrainian energy, power infrastructure, the power grid, and that hasn't happened. The pace is pretty much unchanged. It's 100 to 200 drones a night, pretty much 6 days of the week, and 1 day of the week there's a more substantial strike with somewhere between 20 and 40 missiles of various types, and rough numbers, 200 to 400 drones. And they have kept to this pattern at least since mid-January. So from the Ukrainian perspective, there doesn't seem to be a question as to whether or not the Ukrainians can take it, because the stress on the power grid and on the heating infrastructure is much less. It's much warmer in Ukraine now. But there's no let-up. There's no respite, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. And no respite also because in the kind of attacks, and we've known and talked about this many times, is this drone war. At the same time, Ukraine is getting much better at building their own, at countering drones. I want to connect also to the UK for a moment. We know that President Zelenskyy is there meeting with officials in the UK. The UK themselves already committing many types of munitions, but also drones to Ukraine. So what can we expect from that meeting as it takes place in the UK?
Well, probably we're going to hear more details about ongoing programs that the British have been supporting Ukraine with for quite some time, and perhaps some increased commitment to those programs. That is, from the Ukrainian perspective, first and foremost, the British are the lead, really, on Ukraine's naval drone effort, which has been highly effective. It's a piece of there's really no other word for it, the Ukrainian naval victory over Russia in the Black Sea. Partially, it was won by naval drones that the British helped the Ukrainians develop, although really it's overall a Ukrainian project. So there might be more enhancements to that program, might be more new technologies announced, might be just more scale of commitment promised for that. But beyond that, the British Storm Shadow missile, which is a very effective weapon, and the Ukrainians have used it with great effect. There are limited quantities of them, and the British do not have a bottomless supply of those missiles. They have their own strategic needs. So there will certainly be a discussion in Britain between the Ukrainians and the British about whether or not Britain can part with some of these missiles so that the Ukrainians could use them against the Russians. But both sides understand that it's not a silver bullet simply because the quantities available just are not sufficient to get a major effect. There is a lot of cooperation between the British and the Ukrainians in terms of ground tech and also in training, and there might be some new announcements there as well.
Speaking of new announcements, I mean, this is something we're also waiting for in terms of peace, or rather negotiations of any kind to an end to the conflict on any sort of trilaterals. Now, there isn't any date set yet. We have a comment from the Kremlin spokesman, Mr. Peskov, who said, actually accusing Ukraine that it's really Ukrainians who remain the obstacle, pointing that Donald Trump is urging Zelenskyy to strike a deal. What do you make of peace talks? Where could they realistically be? Do you see those coming up anytime soon? And how distracted are the Americans right now?
Well, how distracted the Americans are is, of course, a question for the Americans. They certainly aren't focusing on Ukraine, but arguably since the oncoming of the Trump leadership to the United States, that has never been a top priority for the United States, or even an important one. So that's really a continuation of something that's been going on for more than a year. As regards other development for other support for Ukraine and the peace process, in Ukraine, the thinking is that the Russians are not good faith negotiators, that at best they would accept a ceasefire or some kind of peace agreement only with the objective of waiting until the right moment and breaking it again. And to be fair to the Ukrainians, they have recent history exactly to that effect. The Russians have repeatedly broken agreements with the Ukrainians and started wars with Ukraine since 2014 twice. So the Ukrainians are extremely skeptical of any kind of Russian commitment, and they don't see that any kind of peace agreement that might be negotiated with the Russians would be anything more than, from the Russian perspective, simply a break prior to the next attack. That being said, at this point, I think that the Ukrainian senior officials are saying that they don't think that the peace process is doing anything right now, that it is effectively dead, that stopped, I think is better to put it. Zelenskyy recently said that from his perspective, the Americans are busy, they have other priorities, and that's clearly the Iran and the Persian Gulf. And there's no real expectation here that there would be any kind of progress on the peace talks anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. And also on that matter, there was a recent interview actually for TVP World. I spoke to Dmytro Kuleba, the former Foreign Minister of Ukraine, and I just want to share one of the quotes that he shared. He says that essentially President Trump is not looking for a strong Ukraine. Ukraine with a strong position, negotiations. What we've seen coming from Washington recently over the last months is expectations that the ceasefire should be achieved through Ukraine's concessions. So when we have a message like that, I mean, this is also someone who was involved for a long time when this conflict broke out. If that is the case, I mean, how do we change that? Can we change it? And what's next in this equation? I mean, I know it's difficult to assess, but I mean, what do you make of his quote and how we maybe turn that in terms of Washington's view?
Well, his quote reflects nothing more or less than the general opinion of not just the Ukrainian national leadership, but pretty much any average Ukrainian. There's a very, very almost universal perception that the American goal since the Trump regime came to power has been to simply browbeat Ukraine into concessions to Russia, and that the Trump administration is very much on Russia's side, and that the Trump administration approach towards Ukraine for the last year, and now a bit more, has been to try and end the war quickly by forcing Ukraine into concessions while requiring practically none from Russia at all, or not even asking for them. And, there's plenty of speculation as to why the Trump administration has taken that approach in Ukraine, but that's speculation. But the point that the Ukrainians would almost always make is that the Americans have lost almost all of their leverage over the Ukrainians. They don't donate weapons to the Ukrainians anymore. That stopped over a year ago. They sell weapons to NATO, which are then handed over to Ukraine by NATO at a markup. So they take a 10% markup on weapons that they send to the Ukrainians. Of that equipment, which is a portion of all the military assistance that Ukraine gets from its allies, which also include not just in Europe. There's South Korea, there's Japan, there's even Australia. There's only a few American weapon systems which are really irreplaceable. One of them is the PAC-3 missile for the Patriot anti-air defense system. There's really no other system out there that the Ukrainians have access to that can intercept a Russian ballistic missile. Russian ballistic missiles are dangerous. They can cause substantial damage, and if there's no means to intercept them, then they will come and hit what they're in the general area that they're aimed at. But that's the point. A Russian ballistic missile is not always precise and accurate, and Ukraine is a big country, and as I referred to earlier, Russia is capable of firing about 20 to 40 missiles at Ukraine a week, and of those missiles, at best, half are ballistic missiles, and you simply aren't going to take down a country as big as Ukraine with that small number of ballistic missiles, and that necessarily means that American assistance to Ukraine, although extremely important and although it absolutely saves lives, it's not, the absence of it is not a war ender for the Ukrainians.
Lot of things that's
American leverage is gone, so what the Americans say they want from the Ukrainians, what they're capable of achieving with the Ukrainians, two different things.
We'll have to jump in there. Lots more to talk about. We'll have to close there. Thanks for all the latest there, Stefan Korshak there from the Kyiv Post. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much for having me. Have a great day.
And thank you for watching. Concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.